right, I'm here. I had no power at my house. I stayed at the Colony last night. I got up early and I got here. Are you proud of me or what?
We're proud of you.
I think other people here also are without power. Our neighborhood's a mess. Well, they told us it could be Friday. It might be Friday before we get power. Thank goodness we have Alicia, who has lots of space. Okay, let's go ahead and put up the first slide if you would, honey. Then I'll go from there. We never know how long these lessons are going to take, so we'll do the best we can. So today, we're doing the last chapter in the book of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations. It's called Mourning for Jerusalem's Holocaust, as Lamentations 1 through 5. It's a little bit shorter lesson than the others have been, so maybe we'll make it. We'll see how it goes. Maybe we should pray first, though, okay? Gracious God, we seek your presence here this morning as we study the devastating story of the fall of Jerusalem and the misery of the people of Israel. Be with us and lead us in this time together. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay, here's a question to think about and talk about if you're so inclined. Can anyone share a time when you or someone you cared about suffered an overwhelming loss or tragedy? We can sit quietly and think about it for a minute, or we can talk about it if you're so inclined. But if you're not, that's okay too. Not an easy topic. I'm sorry, Ellen?
Chris Ebling's accident.
Yes. His life changed in a second.
Yeah, so we're talking about Chris Ebling, and they're in our small group. And yeah, and I was at the hospital when he came in, and yeah, it was, yeah.
All right. And Macaulay.
One of my cousins who was with us at the reunion married later in life. I say at that point it was later. She was almost 40.
Oh,
And
that's so young.
I know it is, but had a child, the love of her life, and that little boy at age 6 developed cancer and passed away a year later, as she had had a second child by then, and the second child is fine, but her husband passed away about 20 years later.
Oh,
I thought she just doesn't deserve that.
yeah. I think the loss of a child is probably one of the most difficult things we go through. I don't know whether to be glad that we had them for those 6 years or to mourn the loss more, it's a difficult. How about somebody online? Anybody online? Victoria, Melody, want to share anything? I'm not hearing anything.
Well, it looks like Victoria's trying to talk, or is she chewing?
No, I was starting to add, but it's nothing in comparison to those. But to me, when my ex-husband walked out, that just rocked my world. I had 4 kids, 10 and under. I found out 3 months later that I needed surgery, but I was so anemic that they didn't think I would make it through the surgery. So they kind of nursed me through for a few months, and we moved back here. And that really shook my world. Like I said, it's nothing compared to losing a child or what Chris and Karen have gone through, but
I can
that was
understand
mine.
that one.
Yes.
Been there, done that, but not the ill health part. And by the way, Victoria called me yesterday and offered me a place to stay. So now she'll live far. So thank you, Victoria. I appreciate that.
Well,
Okay, so this is what we're dealing with. I'm sorry, Barbara.
My dad's younger sister, her husband went back to Europe in 1940 to get his parents out, and that didn't happen, but he got in the concentration camp and he had the numbers on his arm. And nobody in the family faulted him for being a drinker. He had the most haunted look in his eyes. Even I recognized it as a child.
Can't imagine what he went through.
Yeah, and every time I hear somebody that denies the Holocaust, I just get furious.
And so many people now don't understand and don't get to have the concept of what happened. When I taught years ago, which I haven't done for a while, we taught world history, and we used to show a film called Night and Fog. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's not, it was an actual documentary of the liberation of concentration camps. Because they were sophomores in high school, so they were young. But we did a unit on that, and we wanted them to see the horror that men inflicted on other men, people, you know. So anyhow, it's a horrible thing. Okay, so I'm sure that we've all had something happen in our lives that changed the direction. I mean, I live in Omaha, Nebraska. Who thought I'd be in Dallas, Texas? We used to make fun of Texas because because I was a history teacher, and Texas has so much power over what goes in the textbooks because there's so many schools in Texas. And in the North, we didn't always agree with some of the stuff that came out of the textbooks. But anyway, now I'm a Texan, and I still don't always agree, but that's okay. That's okay. Anyhow, here the point is that this is what today's lesson is about. Lamentations, I'm a little bit out. Lamentations is a Greek word, from a Greek word, meaning to cry aloud, and was written in poetic form. It's written in acrostic, and Ellen, you understand that better than I do. My understanding is there's 22 verses in each chapter, except for the chapter 3, which, by the way, has 66 verses. That's 22 times 3. So I don't know if that's 3 separate acrostics or how that works. But and those of you who get that chapter, I apologize ahead of time. But anyway, that's what it is. It's an acrostic poem, and it's written during the time of the Babylonian conquest, which occurred here in 587 and 586 BC. Ellen's talking.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Yeah. So the deal about the acrostic is that the first word in it is
Hebrew alphabet.
starts with the letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So
And it's in
Aleph,
order, right?
Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet. Yeah.
All
mhm.
right, so now
Yeah.
we get a little more info on the acrostics.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And it's
written during-
for
I'm
being
sorry.
able to memorize it. It's to help people be able to memorize it. And so because it's the lament for the people, they're and they don't have it written, they don't have a printing press. It's so people will be able to faithfully lament together.
And by the way, don't let me talk over you because I don't always hear. Just tell me.
We're not gonna do that. We won't.
Well, tell me nice. Tell me nicely. I've got this and thinking it might help, out that direction. We'll find out. We'll find out. Okay. So anyway, we're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, 587, 586 BC by King Nebuchadnezzar. And these lamentations are written to express the deep grief over the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the temple. So the question here is, why is this so devastating? Beyond the obvious, why is it so devastating to the people of Israel?
Because they didn't think it could ever happen to them. They were God's people.
They didn't ever think that this would happen to them because they've always been protected by God, and he took away his protection. So it was devastating.
Go ahead, anything else?
And they lost the temple.
There you go.
God was in the
Yeah.
temple.
Just, who said that?
I did.
You did. Say that again.
God was in the temple.
Yes,
So if the temple's gone, then God's gone.
that's right. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna repeat what she said. God was in the temple, and if the temple's gone, then God is gone. For
That's
the people
right.
online.
Anybody online have a comment? Melanie, Victoria? Okay, so this then is probably the most bitter experience of the people of Israel that they've ever experienced at this time. Because like they said, Jerusalem, not only was Jerusalem destroyed, but so was the temple. And the people were taken away from everything familiar into Babylonian captivity. You hear that also Jerusalem wasn't just the capital. It was the capital, but it wasn't just the capital. It was the city of David's city, and David. It was also inside the temple, which we've already saw, where God's presence dwelt. So they believed that that's where God was, in that temple. And so the temple was destroyed. So they couldn't worship God there. They couldn't make sacrifices there. And so where was God? And then they were all carried off into captivity. So were they abandoned by God? I think they felt that way. Were they ever going to see Jerusalem again? Not this generation. And worst of all, they brought it on themselves, and they figured it out by that time. And so they're a very defeated and destroyed people. So they'd had repeated warnings, and they ignored them, and now here they are, heading to Babylon.
I hate to interrupt, but
That's okay.
I've been Heather's been texting me. She cannot get on, so I don't know if Catherine can help her. She's been working for the last 7 minutes.
I saw a thing on the Rail Mail and about something about the Zoom that Heather posted.
She was wondering if we had electricity.
Internet, yeah, yeah.
Well, she has power back. She
You going to text her? Okay, we're going to go on.
Yeah.
Okay, so in each of our lessons, we have a faith focus. And the faith focus for today is we know through personal experience or through the lives of those close to us what it is like to face an apparently overwhelming tragedy. Christians find comfort in remembering that God loves us and is with us in the midst of any suffering, and that God is working to bring us back into the fullness of life. It may not always feel that way. We may not always believe it, but our faith tells us that that's the way it is. So we're going to look now at 2 Kings, chapter 25, verses 8 through 21. This is a description of the fall of Jerusalem. Uh-oh, I just zipped it up instead of unzipping it. Went the wrong direction.
2 Kings.
2 Kings 25, verses 8 to 21. I'm going to have to get my glasses out. I don't have my glasses, and I got to search for them. So will one of you who out there read verses 8 through 21?
Yeah, well,
Okay, Sandra's going to read verses 8 through 21, 2 Kings 25, 8 through 21.
On the 7th day of the 5th month in the 19th year of Babylon's king Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuzaradan,
Yeah.
there we go, arrived at Jerusalem. He was the commander of the guard and official of the Babylonian king. He burned down the Lord's temple, the royal palace, and all of Jerusalem's houses. He burned down every important building. The whole Chaldean army under the commander of the guard tore down the walls surrounding Jerusalem. The Nebuzaradan, then he, the commander of the guard, exiled the people who were left in the city, those who had already surrendered to Babylon's king and the rest of the population. The commander of the guard left some of the land's poor people behind to work the vineyards and be farmers. The Chaldeans shattered the bronze columns, the stands, and the bronze sea that were in the Lord's temple. They carried the bronze off to Babylon. They also took the pots, the shovels, the wick trimmers, the dishes, and all the bronze items that had been used in the temple. The commander of the guard took the fire pans and the sprinkling bowls, which were made of pure gold and pure silver. The bronze in all of these objects, the 2 pillars, the sea, and the stands that Solomon had made for the Lord's temple was too heavy to weigh. Each pillar was 27 feet high. The bronze capital on top of the pillar was 4.5 feet high. Decorative lattices and pomegranates, all made from bronze, were around the capital, and the second pillar was decorated with lattices just like the first. The commander of the guard also took away Seraiah, the chief priest, Zephaniah, the priest next in rank, and the 3 doorkeepers. Of all those still left in the city, Nebuzaradan took away an officer who was in charge of the army and 5 royal advisors who were discovered in the city. He also took away the secretary of the officer responsible for drafting the land's people to fight, as well as 60 people who were discovered in the city. Nebuzaradan, the commander of the guard, took all of these people and brought them to the Babylonian king at Riblah. The king of Babylon struck them down, killing them in Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was exiled from its land.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, so that's just a kind of a outline of what happened, what you just read. Temple was destroyed, 586 BC. I never say BC or BCE, you know, I know this is probably politically correct, but it's always been BC to me. But anyway, it is what it is. The poor were left behind. They took the higher ranking people. The poor were left behind. They destroyed or took with them the temple furnishings. This is the final deportation of chief inhabitants, and then there was an indiscriminate massacre of the most responsible inhabitants. The priests, those in the command of the soldiers, and members of the king's council. They took them to Riblah, and he had them massacred. They were no more. So it's obviously a very difficult and devastating time in Israel's history. So just a bit of an aside here. Now I was reading, there's some discussion about who wrote Lamentations. And most scholars think they really don't know who wrote it. But some scholars think Jeremiah wrote it because the Lamentations, the words he uses are very similar to some of the phrases in Jeremiah. So anyway, but they all agreed that whoever wrote it, Jeremiah presides over it as one who predicted Jerusalem's fall, and whose prophetic book also abounds with lamentation and weeping. So that's just an aside that I thought was interesting when I was doing my reading. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take these 5 chapters. They have practically the same theme, which is the downfall of Jerusalem, but each poem dwells in a different phase of the subject as intimated in the opening words of each chapter. What we're going to do is, I don't exactly know how we're going to do this, to be honest. We need someone to do one of each chapter. So we need 5 groups, someone who will look at each 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Victoria and Melanie, you'll be chapter 5, okay?
And Heather's on there too.
Heather's on there too.
I'm sorry, somebody else is there too?
Heather's on.
Heather's on, all right. Thank you, that's great. Okay, Sandra and Cynthia, you do 1, you guys do 2. You 2 do 3, and Barbara, you get 4. It's short, it's short. All of them are 24 verses, 22 verses except 3. Sorry, Ann and Ann, just read fast. And what I'd like you to do is select verses to share with the rest of us that portray the primary theme of the chapter. If you want to write, I put some paper on the table, which I happen to have in my notebook. I didn't get pens or pencils because my house was a chaos this morning. So hopefully somebody at your table, if you want to write things down, will have a pen or a pencil. I do have a couple in my purse if you want them. Anyway, we're just
Susan, did you say us online are doing chapter 5 or which
Yeah.
chapter? Okay.
Chapter 5. And while we're looking for the main theme or a verse or 2 or 5 that you believe really tells us, the main primary theme of the chapter. We'll take about, 10 minutes, maybe 15 if we need it. I know that Ann and Ann have a longer chapter.
Maybe Susan will help you.
I could.
She knows all the answers anyway.
I'm going to see if I can just briefly, if each of you, well, it sounds weird in my ears. If each of you, we'll start with chapter 1, and what are just 2 or 3 verses that to you really told the story of the chapter?
I was so it starts with, oh
Yeah, microphone.
Microphone's right there.
I was just kind of looking at it as a whole. It's talking about Jerusalem, but Jerusalem is personified in this as a she, and
Daughter of Zion.
Yeah, and well, it's Jerusalem, then later on in chapter or in verse 3, it's Judah, and then 4, it's Zion, the roads. Then in 6, daughter Zion. But all of it is yeah, verse 6. All of it is Jerusalem as a she, and she's lost her security and her, her there's no one to take care of her anymore. And yeah, we were just thinking, as a woman in that day and age, if you don't have anyone, then you're ostracized, and I mean, you have no way of taking care, of eating, making money, anything. So, I mean, that's just kind of what's happened to her
You've been
as-
abandoned.
yeah. Yeah. So that was what we said.
Okay.
And then at the very end, there's a little bit of, well, maybe these, what's happened to us, maybe it'll come back to them. But, that was like
So
the
look at
last,
the hope at
the
the
very
end.
last verse. Yeah. I mean, hope in the fact that, maybe that Babylon, they don't really say it, but, that they would be, they would get their due also.
All right, ladies, chapter 2.
Well, I noted that that in like the first 4 verses, they used anger or wrath, the Lord's anger or wrath in every verse. So he is really ticked off. And then on to swallowing up all of this, the destruction. He's destroying his own temple.
I like what you said about that. About that must have been very sad.
Yeah, it must have been very sad for him to destroy his temple that he wrote the specifications for. Yes, yes, it was his vision entirely, and they did it to his specification. So it must have been really hard to have torn that all down or allowed it to be torn all down. And then later in the chapter where it was talking about the visions of your prophets were false. They gave you false and misleading information. And then at the end, well, it's not quite the end there.
Which led them to believe they weren't in all that much danger. They chose to listen to the ones that
To
they
the
wanted
wrong-
to hear.
Yeah,
We would never do that.
we
No.
would never, ever do that.
We have much more. No, we don't. Anyway. Anything else on chapter 2?
That's about it. It's all grim. All of it.
Yeah, the only other part that kind of stuck out to me is that very near the end, it's cry aloud to the Lord, O wall of daughter Zion. Let tears stream down like a torrent day and night. Give yourself no rest, your eyes no respite. Arise, cry in the night. At the beginning of the watches, pour out your heart like water before the presence of the Lord. Lift your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint with hunger at the head of every street. So it's like, cry out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, chapter 3, the three poems in one. The
Okay.
long one. Anne and Anne have chapter 3.
Okay, well, the theme of feeling abandoned and getting back to hope is definitely in this chapter. It has some vivid imagery. You'll have to read it all, but a couple of them that stood out to me. One is about the lion or the bear that waits for you and it's going to drag you from the path and mangle you. And another one is gravel have broken my teeth, which makes all of us go.
Yeah.
So, but really, you need to read, he pierced my heart with arrows from his quiver, just made me the target of his arrows, and 12. So by the time we get to verse 21, he says, I have hope. And so some of the things he says about the Lord's 22, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your,
Oh, great is thy
faithfulness.
One of my favorite hymns.
and
And it
26.
comes from Lamentation. Isn't that something? Such a
Yeah.
beautiful hymn. Comes from Lamentations. We should sing it.
You know, I don't sing except in church.
Now change us not.
Uh, It-
Our compassions they fail not.
So here's one. It is good to wait quietly. I think that's one I need to work on. For men, 31, for men are not cast off by the Lord forever. You know, this reassurance that even though things are bad, God has not forsaken you. Oh, so great is his unfailing love. Okey-doke. And so forth. And then,
So forth.
so well, it's a lot of imagery. It really, you have to read it to appreciate it, I think. In 55, or starting in 54, he's got this image
Move it
of
up higher end.
somebody being in a pit and people throwing,
up higher.
oh, and throwing stones at him and water coming up like, you know, he's going to drown. He says, I was about to be cut off, called on your name, O Lord, from the depths of the pit. You heard my plea. Do not close your ears to my cry for relief. You came near when I called you and said, do not fear. So again, it's just from abandonment to hope that the Lord will, even though it looks bad, he has not abandoned you and you need to call him. Let me see what other exciting things I wrote down.
I think it's amazing they have that section in there about my faithfulness, faithfulness in the
Mhm.
middle of all this, like you said,
Right.
imagery and the horrible
And
things
it's
that are going
right
on.
in the center of.
Right in the center of it, right.
Of the book.
Oh,
Of Lamentations.
oh, Lamentations, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's quite I mean, it's just,
It's a powerful chapter,
I'm
actually.
sure it says something.
Well, okay.
Okay, Barbara's gonna do 4. We decided she'd do her verses, and if I had something different, I'd toss them out.
This is chapter 4, verse 5. Those who feasted on delicacies perish in the streets. Those who are brought up in purple cling to ash heaps. Now their vestige is blacker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin has shriveled on their bones as it has become as dry as wood. And then at the end, it says, rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that you've lived in the land of Uz, but that you also the cup shall pass. You shall become drunk and strip yourself bare. The punishment for your iniquity, O daughter of Zion, is accomplished. You will keep you in exile no longer, but your iniquity, O daughter, he will punish. He will uncover your sins.
The whole
There's not
chapter's
an-
about punishment.
There's not a get out of jail free card yet.
Yeah, it's all about punishment, this chapter, this
Mhm.
particular chapter is. It talks about the tongue of an infant sticks to the roof of its mouth for thirst.
Yeah.
And one verse, where is it? 9, happier were those pierced by the sword than those pierced by hunger, whose life drains away, deprived of the produce of the field. And then the one about the children, verse 10, the hands of compassionate women have boiled their own children. They have become their food in the destruction of my people. The Lord has given full vent to his wrath and poured out his hot anger upon the people of Zion. So this 4 is about punishment, the whole thing. And and unlike the other one, there's no hope here. There's no petition at the end of it. There's nothing that says, well, how long, or you're merciful and you'll come back. That's absent from chapter 4.
This
So
is-
it's definitely all Lamentations.
It's the end of war everywhere that had happened.
Use your,
Anytime war happens, this is what you end up with.
yeah.
No, I don't think any of us born in the 40s will ever get past those newsreels of the camps.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was telling Barbara when I used to teach world history a long time ago, we taught about World War II, and we taught about the Holocaust, and we showed a film called Night and Fog. I already mentioned that. And that was just, there, just, just so much of what you read in here is, anyway, it was, okay. Let's go to chapter 5, ladies online.
All right. We found that a lot of this chapter was in the chapter that we read on Lamentations in the book. And it starts off with, remember, O Lord, what has happened to us. Look and see our disgrace. And we talked about how much we'd read in the book about remember and how that cues us and cues God to the idea of covenant, that he remembers his covenant to the people through things like a rainbow or circumcision, or there's usually a sign of remembrance to sign of the covenant. And so that's the people calling God to remember his covenant with them. And then we thought it also finished similarly to, what it talked about in the book. The last paragraph in the chapter is, restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may return. Renew our days of old. And then here's a big word, unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure. And that finishes the book of Lamentations.
Yeah, that's the
Thanks be to God.
last verse. Thank you, ladies. I have a, where is it? I just had a note when I read all 5 of them because I felt I should. One verse really stuck out, and it's in chapter 2, verse 15. Yeah, here it is. All who pass along the way clap their hands at you. They hiss and wag their heads at daughter Jerusalem. Is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of all the earth? And now it's gone. So I thought that was real sad. The whole thing was sad, but I just thought that was such a sad verse that kind of summed it up. But it didn't have all the imagery or the awful stuff in it that we read in the other verses, but it was really sad to read that. I thought, whoops, did I go the wrong direction? Okay. Oh, all right. I think we've done that, right? The primary lament, we did that. We did the images. Oh, how about questions 3 and 4? What does the chapter say to you about the poet's view of God? The chapter that you read. What does it say to you about the poet's view of God and the poet's view of the people?
God is pissed.
He's we're talking about the hands of an angry God here.
And the people have done it to themselves too.
Yeah, and the poet points that out, doesn't he?
Repeat it for them.
All right.
What I said. Yeah. Susan,
Yes.
say online, so the online kids say what I said and what Ellen said. That the
Oh, I'm
people
sorry.
brought it
Let me,
on.
you know what? I'm gonna let you do it because
Yep.
We just said that, what does the poet say about God? And I said, he's pissed.
and I did follow that up with the angry thing. And now Sandra.
And I said that the people brought it on themselves. And that's what, he's pointing out what all the different things that the people have done. So.
What hope, if any, anything online? I'm sorry, ladies. Anybody online have a comment they want to make about question 3? Okay, what about question 4? What hope, if any, do you see in your chapter? And some of your chapters didn't they offer a little bit of hope towards the end? Mine and Barbara's did not. Was there any hope at the end of chapter 1?
What is that little, well, not much.
Not much, just, a little blurb at the end saying, maybe our enemies will get their due. Yeah.
How about chapter 2? Not much. Chapter 3, you had lots of options there. Did you have any hope in there? But they've got them.
Here's the, yep.
Hang on.
I got it. Here I go.
Yeah, 3 had hope in 21 and then at the end. So thank goodness we got the one that had hope. At the end, it says, pay them back for their deeds according to the work of their hands. Give them anguish of heart. your curse be on them, pursue them in anger and destroy them under the Lord's
Well, I
efforts.
don't know how hopeful that is, but get even with those who got even with
Yeah,
us,
get rid of
basically is what
those.
he's saying there.
55 has hope, you know.
Yeah,
clear that.
well,
But
Mary
not-
Barger said in chapter 4, there was no
No.
hope in chapter 4. There was no,
I called
it
on your
didn't
name,
indicate
oh
it.
Lord.
How about chapter 5?
Yeah.
Do you see any
Well-
hope in your chapter?
I'd say the bookend. Go ahead, Victoria.
Well, I was just, I think you and I are going to head the same direction. Just saying at the end of the chapter, you know, it ends with unless you've utterly rejected us. But right before that, the verse is saying, you know, restore us to yourself, Lord, and acknowledging that God has the power to save them. It's just a question of whether he is going to or not. But I think the hope is that God is able to save.
Okay.
Right.
And
Yeah, I
what-
was saying the
Yeah.
bookend exclamations. Remember us, restore us.
Yes, and
And don't
it's,
forget about
there's
chapter
hope there.
3, right in the center about great is thy faithfulness. So there's still people who believe in his faithfulness, even though they're suffering at this particular point in time.
Well, and then there's the 20 verses of lamentations and lack of hope in between those two commands.
Right. Uh-oh, what happened? What did I do? What did I do, Catherine? I just hit the forward button. Fix it, Catherine. That's like, when I do that at home, I yell, Mom, fix it.
The mouse got away.
What did I do? I just hit the forward button. I swear that's all I did.
There's your mouse. Saw it.
I thought we'd give you any technical difficulties today. Did I hit something here here? Did I hit something here accidentally? Would one of those have done that? Aha! There we go. Thank you. That was, it turned out to be easy. I hit the wrong button. Sorry, ladies, that was me. Okay, and that's just a recap, which we've already talked about. Chapter 1 talks about Zion's desolation and sorrow, the deserted city. Chapter 2, Zion's sorrows due to Jehovah's anger, and God's warnings are fulfilled. Chapter 3, Zion's hope and God's mercy, and so you guys get a little more hope than the rest of us did. God's steadfast love endures. Chapter 4, Zion's former glory contrasted with her present humiliation. Barbara and I saw a lot of that. And punishment of Zion, a lot of that in chapter 4. Then chapter 5, Zion's earnest petition for deliverance and a plea for mercy. Let's turn to page 87 in your book, if you would, please. And at the top of page 87, the sidebar called About the Christian Faith, the devastated cities. Our commentator, or one commentator, Richard D. Nelson, helps bring home the sense of loss and shock when he writes, "The smoking ruins of Jerusalem are not hard for us to recreate in our imaginations. The devastated city could well be the symbol of our age: Warsaw and Berlin, Dresden and Stalingrad, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We can trace the contribution to such horrors made by the sin and folly of our contemporary Jehoiakims and Zedekiahs. Whether we also have the theological vision to see in them the hand of God is another matter." So how do you respond to the comments of Richard Nelson concerning the devastated cities? Anybody have a comment on that? Yeah, basically he's saying that, we've had our own, maybe it's not Jerusalem, but it's very similar circumstances and experiences to what the Israelites suffered in Jerusalem. And that, again, he's wondering whether we have the theological vision to see it.
Susan, we're talking about the Ukraine.
Yeah, chapter 2, question 2, right? How do you think God is present in contemporary tragedies? And Karen mentioned Ukraine. What, go ahead, and pass her the.
I was trying.
Ukraine and Gaza are areas where we see total
look at what's happening
devastation.
In Haiti too.
And in Haiti,
Armenia and Afghanistan.
Say that again,
Yes.
Heather?
Armenia, this morning, they just
Yeah.
announced they were giving away 4 of their cities to Azerbaijan. And the people who lived in those cities weren't so happy about it. And then the people, especially the women of Afghanistan, after all of the freedoms they had for 20 years, were stripped from them in a matter of minutes.
So is God present in these contemporary tragedies?
I think he's crying. I don't think he's causing it.
Ellen's shaking her head, yes. He's present. He's allowing it, but he's present in it.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody knows suffering, it's Jesus, and I think he suffers along with us. And not just Christians. I mean, his children, the children of the earth. Yeah, it's just sickening.
How do you think we demonstrate God's power and care in the midst of tragedy? How do we respond? What do we do? We do, don't we? We respond.
Yes.
Sandra, I remember when all that thing happened in Louisiana. Remember, you thought you would take a pickup truck full of stuff, and you had to rent a van because so many people brought things to.
Right.
That was really a really wonderful outpouring.
That Matthew did stuff for his.
Yeah. Matthew did the care for Katrina victims down in New Orleans. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the sheriffs who, all they wanted was new fresh t-shirts that they could, change out because they were just always on the road. They had no,
Yeah, we have news reports about doctors from America who've gone to Gaza to try to help. We have news reports of used to be called the Dallas Baptist men.
Yeah, they changed it.
Yeah, they changed their name. They go when disaster strikes and take food and water and things like that. Wait a minute, I can.
Jose Andres in the World Central Kitchen is what she said.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
They
people
show
give.
up and cook.
People like us who can't be there, we give.
Mm-hmm.
So we can support those who can be there.
And-
Anything else from you ladies online?
And prayer, Susan, prayer,
Right.
um,
Powerful thing.
through prayer and through speaking out against it and, trying to help educate people.
Yeah. Wonder how we're doing sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, let's turn to page 83 in your booklet. Because one of the chapters that you read talked about remember, O Lord. So remembering is critical. In the face of all this loss, Lamentations 5, so that was you ladies online, begins with a call to God to remember them. Remembrance is a significant theme throughout the Old Testament and a major covenant term. Its use here is full of theological significance. In most Old Testament writings, remembrance is intimately linked with covenant. For example, after the flood, God creates the rainbow, places it in the sky as a sign. God then states that whenever the rainbow is seen again in the rain clouds, I will remember the covenant between me and you and every living being among all the creatures. Floodwaters will never again destroy all creatures. Likewise, when the people were enslaved in Egypt, God heard their cry of grief, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the Old Testament records many other instances as well. We should note that here in Lamentations 5, God is asked to remember the people's disgrace. That's in very first verse. By remembering the disgrace, God will mark it, giving it significance. Their shame will gain meaning if it becomes part of God's memory. Moreover, the people are asking God to pay attention to what has happened to them and to act in grace to overturn it. The request for God to remember is a prayer for God to bring about redemption. So remember, O God. And then right above it, across the Testaments. Ellen's already alluded to some of this when she talked about Jesus' suffering a little bit earlier. Remembering is a key idea in Christian tradition. In the words of institutions said at every enactment of the Lord's Supper, we too speak of remembering. We take the bread and cup because Jesus told us to do so, to remember me. The reason is both simple and profound. Every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you broadcast the death of the Lord until he comes. We remember the disgrace of Jesus' shameful death as a criminal upon the cross. We also proclaim this same death as an opportunity for God's saving power to act in the world as never before. We remember the death of Jesus in order to remember the grace of God. Isn't that a great sentence? We remember the death of Jesus in order to remember the grace of God, which shows that God remembered us and acted on our behalf. So, having read that,
Susan,
yes.
um,
Thank you for saying my name, because then I know you want to talk to me.
Yeah,
I mean,
then, so I think that remembering is a huge, I mean, they're saying it's part of the covenant, and I get that. And it heals relationship and brings meaning and significance to relationship. But I also think that remembering, and I say this at almost every funeral, is that remembering remembers us, puts us back together after we've been torn apart. And that there's healing in that. And it's shalom, wholeness. And I think that the Sabbath was meant for remembering that that we are to spend that time of rest in thoughtful, making sense of and finding the significance of, and then marking it and naming it. Just like you said, that when God remembers it, it's like it's in his memory. It's it's been given significance. I think
Yeah.
that's how we meet God. God meets us in remembering.
Get my stuff out. Okay. There's one more. Okay, that's it. Questions from the sidebar we just read. We've talked already about it a little bit. Have we talked about those questions? How do the examples of God remembering the covenant people offer hope? Pretty sure.
Has been there for them in the past.
Mhm.
God has been there for them in the past. Remember, that brings hope for the future.
And then to personalize that and set question 2, how does our remembering what God has already done and what God continues to do offer hope to us? We've all had tragedy in our lives. We're old enough that we have not escaped it.
I was,
Maybe, but not.
so I was thinking too, you brought up that we took all the, a U-Haul thing full of stuff down over to Baton Rouge. And it was but that was just, it was put out on like I think the churches, I don't know if we had a website. I don't know. It was put out to the church but then also on Facebook, and people just came in droves with stuff. Yeah. But then also, and then a year later, John and I went down to Houston to help my sister, mostly with Hurricane Harvey and stuff. But we put on Facebook, and Jared Warren had a cousin down in the area that was just doing a lot with her church, and because we couldn't stay you couldn't stay much of anywhere. You had to find someone to stay with. And so we stayed with his cousin, and, and just people were coming together so much to help, but, just being able to do that, communicate with different, we didn't know these people, we just showed up. So, it's
Yeah, and
just, go ahead.
we had a group from church Tom Dittman was part of our group. We went down to Beaumont and we didn't know where we were staying, and we stayed on cots in a little room in the church that didn't have electricity, but we tore apart houses right down to the studs, and we threw our clothes, put our clothes in bags to throw them away each day, and it was amazing. And it just went on though. We I think did one house, and other groups did one house, and it just went on for miles and miles and miles of this destruction. And we thought, well, we've helped this one, but there were so many people down there to help.
That's interesting, in the midst of all these things you're talking about, that God uses us to be his hands and feet. I remember when Harvey hit my son's house, when they went back home, there were like 10 people they never saw before, waiting to go into their house to help them. And so that when their house got cleaned out, then Kyle went and joined this group and went to somebody else's house. That's just the way they did it through their neighborhood. So he uses us, and he offers us hope through one another, I think, in a lot of situations that we encounter. In what ways, if any, does remembering God's presence and support change our feelings during tragedy?
Gives us hope.
Gives us hope,
And peace,
peace,
inexplicable peace.
Comfort.
gives us hope and peace. Barbara knows I'm a teacher. She's very
We see God at work in the hands of those around us. We'll see people come to help, and we'll see God.
Right, that's right. Any other comments from anybody online or in the room? I remember, yeah.
Valley View was decimated last week.
Yeah.
It's close to me. It's close to us. Yeah.
Is someone talking? Because I can't hear anything.
All right, good point. Kara's getting ready to say something. She's getting.
I was just going to say,
Okay.
I am just getting warmed up. So, well, there was a tornado that really ripped through the little town of Valley View, and did so much destruction. And I have family that lives in Gainesville. It's just about 12 miles from Valley View. And I saw on someone's website, I think it was Kim Claxton's, all the things that they were needing. There was a whole list of things if you wanted to help that were needed, and there were normal things, that almost anybody would need. But started off with feminine hygiene products,
Right, and
water, yeah, anything like that. So anyway, we have tragedies all around us.
And diapers. Yeah,
Yes, all those things.
you're right. We do. And what is, the thing about number 3 is, that's not in there, is that anger. There's no anger in there. So in what ways, if any, is remembering God's presence and support change our feelings during tragedy? When I lost my sister, which is senseless in my mind and still is, I was really angry, really angry. They just started Faith and Grief. And someone called me and asked me if I would come and talk. And I said, I can't do it. I'm too mad. I'm still mad. I can't do it until I work through the anger. And then somebody said, well, maybe that's a good way. You should tell people that it's okay to be angry. And I said, I can't do it. But anyhow, there are times when I still get angry about the circumstances, but I'm not angry at God anymore. And I have memories. I have really good memories. And I have those because he gave them to me and allowed me to keep them. So that's a personal remembering for me. So anyhow, remember, O Lord. Remember us, O Lord, and then we need to remember all the times in our lives when he remembered us. And I think that's really, when you think about it, that's what this is about in a lot of ways. So they ask us to go back to look at the faith focus one more time. So we're going to look at the faith focus one more time. We're going to look at Live the Story, which is on page 86. So what's the faith focus? We know through personal experience or through the lives of those close to us what it is like to face an apparently overwhelming tragedy. Christians find comfort in remembering that God loves us and is with us in the midst of any suffering, and that God is working to bring us back into the fullness of life. That's our faith focus for today. They want us to remember that. So in Live the Story on page 86, few of us have experienced a communal tragedy like the destruction of Jerusalem, yet many of us know what it is like to suffer a significant loss. Every congregation has someone who has experienced the death of a loved one, and most congregations have members who have survived divorce, physical trauma, ruin, or severe natural ruin or severe physical trauma. We know through personal experience or through the lives of those close to us what it's like to face apparently overwhelming tragedy. Such events, unfortunately, are part of life. How is it, then, that life goes on? How do we, like those sent into exile so many years ago, find the strength, the courage, and the sheer willpower to go on? Psychologists speak of stages of grief through which we move back into a wholeness of being. As human beings, these are part of our psychological makeup, and under normal conditions, they form our emotional healing process. As Christians, we have another answer as well. We persevere because we have hope. We trust that Jesus Christ, who overcame sin and death, will overcome our difficulties and our sorrows in the proper time. After all, Jesus taught that God loves us and is with us in the midst of any suffering, working to bring us back into the fullness of life. Paul, writing about the realities of living as human beings in this world, put it this way: but we have this treasure in clay pots, so that the awesome power belongs to God and doesn't come from us. We are experiencing all kinds of trouble, but we aren't crushed. We are confused, but we aren't depressed. We are harassed, but we aren't abandoned. We are knocked down, but we are not knocked out. We always carry Jesus' death around in our bodies so that Jesus' life can also be seen in our bodies. That all comes from 2 Corinthians 4. So that's our faith focus. They also ask us, if we so desire, which is why I put it up there like I did, take some time to reflect on and or write a lament addressed to God if you are dealing with a loss or tragedy in your life, and if you feel the need to do so. This is an individual exercise to be shared only if you feel the need to share. Just know that God hears your lament and hears everything you want to tell him. And so the bottom line is God is in our joys and he's in our losses, even in the ones that are the most overwhelming. And it's okay to lament. It's okay to lament.
And I think it's healing to lament,
Yeah.
you know, because it's, you know, you're processing it. It made me, so Psalm 137 is the lament over the destruction of Jerusalem. And I'll just read part of it because at the end of it, it gets to where they're like getting back at Babylon. It's not very pretty. But by the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down there and we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there, we hung up our harps, for there our captors ask us for songs, and our tormentors ask us for mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. And I mean, I just think that lamenting is important. It's like journaling. It's a very important form of prayer. And crying out and being angry at God and asking God if he's angry at, you know, the whole thing. really important.
I've been even listened to a singer called Don McLean. He has a song called By the Waters of Babylon. We lay down and wept for thee, Zion. Comes from there.
Woods in Godsville too.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
That is in Godspell also, Godspell, the musical,
Yeah.
which is based completely on the book of Matthew, but they throw that in there too. So, yeah, and it's a beautiful song in Godspell.
Okay, we're gonna go Joyce. Well, any other comments, first of all? Anybody online or in the room?
Thank you, Susan.
Okay,
That's good.
then.
Yeah.
And we're gonna get done on time, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, joys and concerns.